The CWL Pro League Qualifier was filled with a ton of surprises, but one of the primary stories was related around the year of the amateurs. Surprisingly, teams like Midnight Esports, UYU, Accelerate, even Enigma 6 managed to qualify for the Pro League and quite literally shocked the entire Call of Duty community. Keeping in mind, out of the 80 players that are going to be in the Pro League this year, 24 of them have never played in a CWL sanctioned league, meaning that going all the way back to the first league in Black Ops 3, none of these players have ever played in one. That means 30% of all players in the CWL to start off things, this will be their rookie season. This is an insane draft class that we're having coming into this year, and to go along with some other stats as well, out of the 24 new players, 14 of them come from either UYU, Accelerate, Midnight, or Enigma 6. That's nearly 60% of the newly added players coming from 4 teams. So it's not a matter necessarily of, oh, wow, it was one player who managed to have a solid performance in a pro team. We're seeing like an Abizi type of E-United situation. No, these are teams of amateurs. It wasn't a matter of just like individual players rising to the occasion and having good performances. This was a team effort. Don't even get me started on heretics. Like outside of methods, right? All 4 of them have never played in a CWL official league either. So there was a matter of a ton of different talent that has never played in the CWL before. Also, considering this, $764,000 earned last year in World War II out of a certain amount of players, they will not be starting off in the CWL Pro League. Meaning that amount of money was earned by players who will not start off in the CWL. 50% of that, by the way, comes from FaZe, which is also another story that we'll talk about for another time. To keep along with the stats, something like 26, I think, out of the 64 players, I had someone tweet me, 26 out of the 64 players who are in the World War II Stage 2 Pro League will not be at the start of the 2019 Pro League. I mean, to put it lightly, we are officially entering in to the next generation of Call of Duty Esports, and it happened in a very dramatic fashion. It happened with one of the most surprising and fun tournaments of the year. I had very high hopes for this tournament with all the things that would be on the line, but I had no idea it was going to be as fun to watch, as interesting, and I didn't know I was going to be on the edge of my seat as much as I was when the tournament was going on. And at times, right? I mean, there were teams who surprised, and there were some teams who made it that wasn't really too much of a surprise when you look at the beginning to the end. But all of these rosters, right, struggled, and they are known as pro teams. I mean, I could say comfortably 3 out of the 4 rosters that I'm about to list, I had easily making it through. Like, there was not even a question in my mind. I would have been absolutely shocked if they wouldn't have even made it just through groups, let alone the entire tournament. 100 Thieves, Team Spacely, Reciprocity, Red Reserve, all at times looked like they weren't going to make it. 100 Thieves had a slow start. Team Spacely had a slow start. Team Reciprocity had a great first game and then started to kind of coast through. Red Reserve, they played one game to try to stay alive versus G2, and they somehow made it. Like, there were so many moments where very, very well-known, very established professional players barely made it into the Pro League, which means, right, this wasn't an insane story of, wow, like this was the max amount of amateur players that we saw make it. There could have been more. Like a round goes another team's way easily. We could have seen that number 24 go up to 28 to 30, 32, etc. Like, that was very, very possible. Now, let's talk about the reason why we saw such surprising results, because we talk about the stats, we talk about the figures, but to me, the major difference that we see with the surprising results is the practice factor. And I think this tournament taught a lot of people the difference that World War II had now to Black Ops 4. I would almost compare it to the same likelihood of how jetpacks changed Call of Duty. When we went from Ghost to Advanced Warfare, the dramatic change that we saw, it's probably the exact same change, if not even more now, from the World War II system now to Black Ops 4. 5v5, specialists back in the game. The map, the game mode control totally changing things up. Practice was a huge factor for teams to have going on into this tournament, and making sure everyone's comfortable with their roles, knowing which maps to map veto out, etc. All of those things came into the practice regimen, which is what I think the huge portion of the performance that we saw from amateurs. That was the major reason why we saw them have so much success. Along with that, you got to keep in mind Call of Duty has a cycle, right? It's a yearly cycle. We are currently at the 40-meter mark in a 100-meter race, right? If you were to have the photo finish right now, you probably wouldn't see the exact same results. You wouldn't have the same first, second, third team at the start or at the 40-meter mark that you're going to have at the end, right? So that's something to also take into consideration as time does go on. We have teams who start off very well early on. They're quick out of the gate, and there's some who start to coast when it comes down to the end, or maybe they have a very strong ending finish. Maybe teams like FaZe Clan last year were examples of that. But to me, it's also pretty insane that we have so many new faces in the league. And these are names that I've actually become very familiar with in following the amateur scene and being able to commentate over these guys. It's unbelievable to know that within just a year's time, most of them would have been in the Pro League. And I also want to preface this. All of these guys are phenomenal, right? All of these guys had all-star talent when it comes down to a number of different amateur tournaments that I've been involved with commentating over, but by no means were they dominating. Like, there are other teams, there are other players out there who I think, if put together, they could have also been in the Pro League, which is crazy to think about. So names like Envoy, Brack, Major Maniac, Profizi, Fastball, Parzelian, Skies, Spoof, Kismet, Jet Li, like Gorgonite, like those guys, they were playing in these tournaments, but they have had some close matches. Like, a lot of these guys last year were playing in World War II, and they just couldn't kind of get to the next level, but they had competition, and that competition is starting to turn the age of 18 over the next few years. So to say that we're hopping in the next generation, this tournament may just be the first one. It's not going to be an outlier necessarily. So, but for me, I think the major difference that we saw, it really came down to preparation. It came down to practice. It came down to just overall knowledge of who you're facing off against. I think having a coach/analyst at this tournament would have been huge. And a lot of the amateur teams I know were at least trying to find a few, even having some people stay at home and watch matches and whatnot. But my big thing right now, as we see a ton of rookies enter into the CWL Pro League this year, is how they're going to deal with the Pro League. How are they going to deal now with the pressure? Because this was just the start, right? This tournament was the easy part. And for a lot of teams, it wasn't easy, outside of like Midnight, for them to go as dominant as they were in their pool. This is just the start, right? The pressure of being in pool play constantly, the pressure of, like I said, no longer being the underdog, the pressure of facing off on the biggest stage. A lot of these guys haven't even been to champs. Like, some of them have. None of them have gotten to the point where they're in the money and they're facing off against the Optic Gamings of the world, having the entire Call of Duty community, hundreds of thousands of people watching them online, thousands in the crowd, just ruling against them, waiting for their every mistake. It hasn't happened yet. And along with the practice and the regimen that you're going to have to kind of set in tone that, hey, like, I can't just take a break anymore. This is my job. I have a contract on the line, and that's going to be very important for me to see how these rookies deal with their first season and how they can kind of get used to things and how consistent can they be when it comes down to next year's title. Will we see the same faces? Will we see the same generation of Black Ops 4 players? Will they translate into other titles? A lot of things that are going to be up for question as time moves forward. But one thing that a lot of these younger pros have to be very careful of, and I'll get into this more in a later segment, is the contracts regarding organizations and how safe that they are. For those who know, for the Pro League, organizations now have control of that spot. There are certain time periods throughout the Pro League where teams are allowed to make unlimited changes. Unlimited changes, by the way. Unlimited. Yes, they can make as many as they want to. They can drop an entire team, pick another up. We'll get into it later, but they have to be very careful with their spot. And I want to make sure that, for these younger players, that they are aware of that they are keeping in mind their position. They are moving forward with an organization they feel comfortable with a contract they feel comfortable with, because there probably weren't that many people coming into this tournament who are keeping that in mind, knowing all of that information. But I think overall, as I was watching the tournament, I was seeing, different teams compete, seeing, fan favorites get eliminated, seeing new players on the, horizon, seeing them kind of perform. This is great for Call of Duty Esports. It really was. Like, this is a good thing to see happen, seeing more competition toward the top level, even seeing some of our favorites get knocked out, like FaZe Clan to be one, G2 another, I know was big for a lot of people, but it gave them a reality check, right? It gave them the knowledge that, hey, these amateurs, they're improving every day. Maybe we've taken them lightly. Maybe that open bracket is a bigger grind than we maybe initially thought. And so for me, to see the biggest and the most competition possible is the greatest thing that we could have for the game. And along with the game and whatnot, that also includes the format. The format was great, right? The format was phenomenal. There were a ton of people who were coming out and complaining and talking about it and saying, oh my gosh, well, we didn't really have enough chances or anything like that. Every team for the most part, right? If you were good enough, you had a chance. And if you didn't have one chance, you had two. If you didn't have two, you had three. You had four. There were plenty of opportunities to make the league, but you didn't clutch up. That's the thing to be keeping in mind. The format was fine. There's nothing you can blame on the format. You played on LAN. You played tons of matches. You had a double elimination bracket. You had your chance. So for me, I think the format was great. I think overall this is a great thing moving forward for Call of Duty Esports, and I hope we see similar things. If franchising wasn't necessarily to come around next year, I hope we keep up the same format as far as just trying to improve on Call of Duty's previous faults.